Okay, we're gonna do a little talk here on Neville Goddard was interviewed on how he teamed up with Abdullah, his teacher. So he got together with Abdullah, and a lot of people wonder about Abdullah. So all we really have is what Neville said about him, to be honest. And he said a lot, right? So just before I start, now I'm going to read this thing, but you have to understand that Neville Goddard lived in a different time, right? He's been dead for over 50 years, right? So, and some of this stuff was recorded obviously well before his death. So it was a different time. So you need to understand that when referring to Abdullah, Abdullah was Ethiopian, right? He was African. So Neville uses words. I've read about Neville, referring to Abdullah, and he's used words like Negro, right? In his day, in America and elsewhere, people of color of African descent or from Africa were called Negro. That was just what the race was called, right? I know that that's not, that has fallen out of favor these days. But if you look at, say, organizations that have been around a long time, like, say, the NAACP in America, it stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. There was a time when, now we say people of color, but at one time, it was colored people, right? That's fallen out of favor. It's from a different time. So just keep that in mind. Don't anybody get triggered by that, because there is no disrespect meant when quoting something from an earlier time. Now, honestly, I'm not sure if this little piece has that, but it might. So that's why I mention it now up front. Okay? So, here we go. So, Neville was asked a question. And the question was, on the recording, was inaudible. But it was about Abdullah and imagining and demonstrating stuff. So this is Neville's response, and it's quite lengthy. Hopefully I can get through this. So he said, well, I'll tell you in details exactly how we got together. It was 1933. If you remember, there was a frightful depression on in our country. Millions were unemployed. In New York City, you would go through the tunnel into Gimbel's, which was a department store, from, say, the Square, Herald Square, where Gimbel's begins. Now you just have Macy's over there in Herald Square. It goes all the way through to the Holland Tunnel. They were sleeping with the permission of the mayor, 3 and 4 deep, as far as the eye could go. There was no place to go. In the park, in the summer months, they were allowed to sleep in the park, sleep all over the place. And the long lines for coffee and bread were there to give them. There were millions unemployed. We then had a population of not more than, say, 130 million, as against today's 192 million. Well, there's a lot more now. I'm adding my own little commentary in line here. This was said a long time ago. I was a dancer, and if you couldn't eat, you couldn't pay to watch a dancer, so there were no shows playing on Broadway. I think we had 5 Broadway shows, and they were running on paper, just passing out paper to go and see them, really, instead of the usual 50 to 60 shows that you usually get. Well, what I'm getting at is I didn't have a job. I had no money, and I was living in a basement on 75th Street, and he, Abdullah, lived on 72nd Street in a very lovely home that was owned by Morgenthau, whose son, Henry Morgenthau Jr., was then the Treasury Secretary of our country. A cabinet member of, he was under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, U.S. Treasury Secretary. But his father owned the house, but he didn't live there, and he rented the first floor to my friend Abdullah. I said to Abdullah in the month of October, late October, Ab, you know I've been gone from Barbados for almost 12 years. I came here in 22, and it's almost 12 years, and I've never had a desire to go back. But now I have a hungry desire, a haunting desire to go to Barbados. Not a thing stops me, but a lack of money. I have no money. He said to me, you are in Barbados. Right? You know this story, but let's continue with it. I said, I am in Barbados. He said, yes, you are now in Barbados. And so you see Barbados, and you see America from Barbados. You could smell the tropical land of Barbados, see only the little homes of Barbados, and that's all you do. You just simply sleep this night in Barbados. Well, I thought him insane, really. I mean, at the moment, it seemed so stupid because 72nd Street, we still had 50 and 60-story buildings, and little Barbados with a little 3-story building, almost the tallest that you'd find, and narrow little streets and no sidewalks. And I'm walking on a sidewalk that is wider than the widest street in Barbados on 72nd Street. Well, nevertheless, that night I slept in Barbados. I assumed that I'm in Barbados, in my mother's home, and that I saw America relative to Barbados, and it wasn't under me that night. It was north of me, about 2,000 miles. Well, the next day, I didn't tell him anything. About a week later, when nothing happened, I thought I would approach him. This time we've moved into November. I said, you know, Ab, not a thing has happened. He wouldn't discuss it with me. He turned his back on me and went into his little library and slammed the door. About 3 times I tried to open up the discussion with my friend Ab between that moment when I first talked to him and the end. He would never discuss it on the basis. How could he discuss with me how I am going to Barbados when I am already in Barbados? That's stupid to discuss how I'm going to go when I am in Barbados. And if I am faithful to my assumption, I can't discuss the how. I'm already there. Well, this went on. On the morning of the 4th day of December, there's no job, no place to go. And the last boat that will get me there by Christmas is going to sail on the 6th. Under my door is a little letter from my brother Victor, and he said, as a family, we were never around the table at Christmas together. That Cecil, he's my oldest brother, he left home before the last was born because we have a large family. There's 8 years between my sister Daphne, who was the 8th child, and then my brother Joe. Well, in that interval, my brother Cecil went off to Demerara. So, never as a family were we ever together at Christmas. So in the letter, he justifies why he's asked me to come. I know you don't have a job, and there's no excuse for not coming. And so I'm enclosing a draft for $50. You may need a shirt, a pair of shoes, socks or something, and I've notified the Furnace Withy line that you'll come for a ticket. So the ticket is waiting for you at the Furnace line. Well, I was so excited. I rushed on down to the Furnace line and gave them my letter. They said, yes, we have a message here from your family in Barbados. We'll give you a ticket, but we haven't any first-class tickets left. You can go third class and use the facilities of the first, but you have to sleep third class until you hit the island of St. Thomas. When you hit St. Thomas, someone disembarks, then you may take a first-class bunk. I said, I'll take it. I rushed right up to Abdullah and said, Ab, I got my ticket for Barbados, but I have to go third class. I'm all elated and happy about it. He said, who told you that you are going to Barbados? And who told you that you went to Barbados third class? You went to Barbados and you went first class. Would say no more. He isn't even happy that I'm going to Barbados now. So I went down on the morning of the 6th day of December with my third class ticket. I went up to the desk as they're checking in the passengers, and I put my ticket forward, and they said, I've got good news for you, Mr. Goddard. Someone has canceled, and you're going first class. And I went first class all the way down to Barbados. 10 days down, 10 days back, with 3 heavenly months in Barbados. So all that I did, I tried to the best of my ability to do with his almost insolence. He was rude, but he taught me by his rudeness that I cannot discuss how if I am doing what I'm supposed to do. He tells me right away, you are in Barbados. Like someone comes to you now, and you would apply this principle towards their request, and they say, oh, I would love to be happily married. And you say to her or him, you are now happily married. They look at you as though you're insane. But that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You are now happily married. Well, if I am now happily married, and I'm a lady, I would instantly begin to feel that ring there in my imagination. And I'd let others see that I have my ring. Well, that would imply I'm happily married, a wedding ring. And so if I don't wear it from then on, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. So in my imagination, I have to go to bed wearing my ring and actually do all that I would do in that state. Oh, he said, you're in Barbados, and I'm in New York City physically. But he put me in Barbados in my imagination, so that I slept in Barbados to the best of my ability. But you know, days go into weeks, and the weeks went into a month, and I'm trying my best to open the discussion with him, to get a little hope. No hope. He wouldn't give me any encouragement if I did what he told me to do. Well, we are all human, enough to want another little discussion, another little push. And so he taught me the lesson that there is no such thing as a little pregnancy. No such thing. If you did it, then you're pregnant. Let the child grow, and interfere with it is going to be a miscarriage. You assume that you are in Barbados. Now you are pregnant. The idea is that you are going to give birth to a journey which will land you right in Barbados. So you've assumed it. That is conception. Now, don't try to argue. You have conceived. And all you have to do is be a faithful mother and bear that child. And don't discuss it with me anymore. He never discussed it after he told me I was in Barbados. And I learned so many things from the old fellow. I came back because I wasn't drinking. I brought him 2 lovely old bottles of brandy, the best that we have on the island. 2 lovely bottles and some rum. So I gave him my father's rum, gave him the brandy. A week later he said to me, say, how long do you expect those things to last? I learned my lesson. I thought he would sip those things for a year. Oh no, they were gone. And he wondered how long I supposed these things to last for him. And of course, he really disillusioned me terribly on so many things because I would go and dine with him. And Abdullah, I was then a strict vegetarian. I was trying to overcome it after I came back, gradually. And of course, he would sit down and he would have 2 or 3 big shots of rye. I mean, big shots of rye. And then he would wash down his meal with a lot of porter. Or it wasn't beer, it was ale. And then he would, at the end, like Churchill, a big, huge bowl of ice cream. I said, Ab, how can you do that? Oh, he said, you couldn't do it. It would poison you because you have quibbles. But you know that God made everything. Everything is God. You would assume that he made something and not the rest? No, God made everything. And he'll send me back to the Bible. Go back to the Bible and read the book of Acts. And Peter couldn't eat the unclean thing. And then the Lord said, slay and eat, for that which I have cleansed. Then a sheet came down filled with all manner of animals and food. And the voice said to Peter, slay and eat, for that which I have cleansed. So he said, you have quibbles, Neville. With any of your quibbles, it'd poison you. But he would sit down and polish off this enormous meal and wash it down with ale, proceeded with 3 shots of rye, and here was a man truly of the spirit. But if I judge from appearances, I would say, well, he can't be a holy man, for which today I am most grateful that he wasn't, because he taught me real Christianity. and he was born in North Africa of Jewish parents and raised in a strict Orthodox Jewish home. But he knew more Christianity than anyone I've ever met, because he spoke the Hebrew tongue perfectly. He spoke the other tongues, and rabbis would come to study with him. And he and I would discuss day in and day out for over 5 years, teaching me all that he could teach me that I could absorb concerning the Kabbalah, the great mystery of how this thing is put together in these simple little letters of Hebrew. Let me just quickly break this reading, and in case somebody out there doesn't know. There is a Jewish community in Ethiopia. They have a large Christian community. They also have Jewish, and it's said, I've watched these specials on, like Discovery and all these other things, where they claim that a long time ago, some of the tribes of Israel, some of them made it far down into Ethiopia, and they married, I guess, with the locals, and there's like Jewish bloodline in these Ethiopian Jews. And they've done DNA tests and found the Cohen gene. There's like some kind of a gene or chromosome or something that can only go through like the mother's line, and it's called the Cohen or whatever. It's like the high priest, and it's in these people. So Abdullah could be an Ethiopian African and be Jewish at the same time, and there's a tradition of that there. So that's in case you're all confused. Oh, wait a minute, I thought he was Ethiopian. They're saying he's Jewish. He's both. So let's continue with this. So now back to Neville. I know that before the Civil Rights Bill in New York City, no Negro could go to the box office and buy a seat in the orchestra. You'd get a seat in the balcony. You think Abdullah would ever let me go and buy the seats? No. Abdullah would go right straight down to the box office, and he was a Negro, I tell you, and he'd go right down and say, I want 2 in the center. I don't want too far back, not be on the 6th row, right in the center. Yes, sir. Buy the 2 seats for any show. The first opera I saw, Abdullah took me to it. It was Parsifal. 5 hours, and I'd never seen one before. It seemed it would never come to an end. Of all the operas to be introduced to opera through Parsifal, Good Friday it was too. You go on Good Friday in New York, he said. When you go to Parsifal and you sit there and think, my Lord, is it ever going to come to an end? And he is drinking it in, every little note. He understands every little point, and he's so in love with it. And I'm sitting because I'm next to Ab, just waiting, hoping, but nothing happens. It goes on and on. It's 5 hours later, and then that's it. Okay, so that's that one. Now, let's get to Neville Goddard and Abdullah's age. According to there's excerpts, the last time he saw Abdullah was in 1956. And his secretary said that he went to Ethiopia to die in 1957. That was from a lecture in 1964. He met Ab in 1929 when he was in his late 80s, almost 90. That would place Ab's birthday sometime in the 1840s. He said Ab lived to over 100, but if we calculate from this, he would have been over 115 at least in 1957. So, I mean, we don't know if these numbers are totally accurate. Maybe he looked older than he was, who knows, but he could have been very old. And if he had that kind of a command of things, I guess it's not unbelievable that he could, control his longevity to a certain point, especially if he could drink in a legendary way and overeat and all this stuff. They said, anyway, let me read before I go on too much. It says here, he said to me in 1933, I met him in 29, and he did everything. He ate everything. He drank everything. He didn't smoke, only because he just didn't enjoy it, but he did everything. An old man. He was in his late 80s when I met him. So from somewhere else, Neville was also quoted as saying, he and I studied. I studied with Abdullah for 7 years in New York City, 7 days a week. We were inseparable. Ab was an old man when I met him. He was then about 90. He was born in Ethiopia, of the Negro race in the Hebraic faith. That was his background. I was born as you see this garment. I've worn this from birth in the Christian faith. And we were inseparable. He taught me scripture. as I never heard it from my mother's knee or from my minister or from anyone who taught me the Bible before. It became a book that was alive to me under the guidance of Abdullah. Well, here is a man. You look at him. Here is a Negro, this brilliant, wonderful gentleman, never once, for one moment, made any other claim. He would only say to me, I picked up this garment 90-odd years ago in Ethiopia. He always described it as a garment that he wore, just a garment. From somewhere else, he was quoted as saying, Abdullah lived to be over 100 and had one consuming desire, to put the body back where he picked it up, which was in Ethiopia. The last time I met Abdullah was about 8 years ago in New York City. About 7 years ago, I met his secretary, and she voiced that request of his and said he was planning to return to Ethiopia. I haven't seen or heard from Abdullah or the secretary since. We've said earlier that Neville said that Abdullah lived in New York City at 30 West 72nd Street. So it's off Central Park West. You know, I work in New York City. That's far from where I work, but I wonder, I mean, probably Google Map it, right? You could probably Google Map it and see what the building looks like now, or if it's even still there. Because all of this stuff was written about over 50 years ago. So here's the stuff about Morgenthau and Roosevelt. I already read that above, so I'm not going to repeat that. So here, this part is they searched for Abdullah's real name. The idea to search for Professor Abdullah on newspapers came from someone researched on Reddit. And let's see what else. They also mentioned the other famous guy, Joseph Murphy, who met Abdullah in California, where Murphy lived, out in California. No, actually, he didn't meet in California. He was being interviewed in California, and he was talking about how when living in New York, Murphy apparently lived in New York at one time, the same way Neville did, and he met this Professor Abdullah, who was a black Jew from Israel, who knew all the intricate symbolic details of the Old and New Testaments, and that this meeting was one of the most defining episodes of Murphy's spiritual evolution. Upon meeting him, Ab, who had never known or met Murphy and his family, told him he was one of 6 children, not 5, as he originally thought. Later on, when Murphy interrogated his mother, he found out that he had another brother who was stillborn, and whose existence had never been mentioned by his parents. This information appears on 32 and 33 of the book, a book he wrote, and that he lectured at Cambridge. While searching for Professor Abdullah from 1850 to 1929 in various New York newspapers, they found Professor Abdullah, who advised during that time period as an advisor. The man below is not Ethiopian, but a German Jew. This does not follow the physical description of both Neville Goddard and Joseph Murphy of an Ethiopian, 5'11" black man, but rather a short, stout German man with blue eyes that knew various mind tricks and considered himself a man of common sense. But for the sake of research, and since the man below is approximately the age that Neville mentions Abdullah was when he met him in New York, they provided newspaper clippings on that. So that sounds like a different guy, kind of, right? Obviously. So basically, they can't really. They're trying to nail this guy down. Like there was a Sun article from 1899 titled "Astrologer Who Was Swindled." It states Professor Abdullah's real name is Baron L. Berendi. Baron L. Berendi, who professionally is Professor Abdullah, astrologer, went before Magistrate Brand in the Center Street Police Court as complainant against a woman who told how he had been swindled out of $80. This may be a typo because the article by the same newspaper a year before, one John Smith missing, the name is Berent, not Berendi. So, after Miss Fox, this is a quote, after Miss Fox left, Professor Abdullah sat down and thought the case over. Out of business hours, Abdullah admits that he is not Abdullah at all, but that his name is Berent, and that he has no esoteric powers, but merely brings to bear on the problems submitted to him a reasoning mind and a wide experience. Formerly, he called himself a professor of common sense until he found that credulous public liked high-sounding titles better. Anyway, this researcher, they're all over the place with this stuff. So I don't know how much more I'm going to go in here because it just, they don't, they're getting lots of different people and they're just not completely lining up, which basically means that, this guy is, he did just, there's not really, how are you ever going to really track down who this man was, right? All you could really do is go by what Neville and Murphy said. Abdullah didn't leave behind any stuff like that, but apparently he was a profound individual. I mean, he could just walk up to you, almost like a Jesus type character, right? He could like walk up and tell you things you never knew, almost like a psychic, right? Like a psychic medium. And, the fact that I've heard of people referring to their human forms, their bodies as garments before, where, it's your soul, your spirit, your ghost, who you really are. Your soul is inside this garment, wearing this body like the way you would wear a garment. And how he was saying that he was going back to Ethiopia to lay down the garment in the same place that he acquired it. It's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. So there's really not much else about this guy, this man. But thankfully, he left behind a lot of these teachings with Neville and with Joseph Murphy, and we're all the beneficiaries of that. We're able to tap into that, and it's weird because like we all have these. We're all connected to God. Uh, maybe Abdullah was better at communicating certain things. I guess we all could be at different levels of our, you know, of this. I mean, I don't want to, I'm getting tongue-tied trying to put this into words here, but, I can't help but think that we are, if you're uncovering and being exposed to this material, somehow your essence wanted it to be exposed to you in a conscious manner so that you could uh, ponder it and try to understand it and benefit from it in some way, right? So anyway, this was what this is what's out there on this mysterious Abdullah of Neville Goddard fame, and that's you know that's really. There's a lot of stuff written here that is just like interviews and stuff that's just gonna go off into the weeds, I think, because we don't even know some of these writings if it's the real Abdullah. Because basically, they have these references to other people who were calling themselves Abdullah at different times in history here, and some of them were acting almost like con men, right? Like con men, dime store psychics, right? And I just don't see that as Neville or Murphy's Abdullah. Neville or Murphy's Abdullah was, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, above all that. I mean, yeah, he was 90 when he met Neville, so I know that we had a whole 90 years before that. Who knows what he was doing as a young man? Maybe he did some of that stuff when he was younger, and then evolved into the Abdullah that Neville knew. Who knows? But so that's really it. So anyway, to wrap this up, there are no, like I said earlier, in another video, there are no pictures of the real Abdullah. The pictures that you see out there are just, they're not the real Abdullah. People put that in there just hoping that it flies, I guess. That they put a guy, an African guy in a turban, and you're supposed to believe that's the real Abdullah. But there really are no photographs of him that we know of. Just as mysterious, we don't really know any true details about him beyond what you learn from Neville Goddard or Joseph Murphy. So, we do know that he had tremendous control over his body, and that he could do things to excess and not get sick from it. Which would explain how we're always out there reading online, right? We go online, we're reading about diseases and this and that. Anything makes us sick today, right? You go a little bit too much and you feel sick. But this guy was drinking rye whiskey and then a huge meal and then ice cream and this and that. And who knows, if he was a smoker, he probably could have smoked boxes of cigars like Churchill and been fine. He had such a control over his reality, that it didn't matter. And he was telling Neville at that time, this would kill you, Neville. You have too many quibbles, too many things you're worried about, too many things you buy into. So Abdullah was, by all accounts, an amazing man. And, he didn't leave behind a writing, so you can't really learn directly from him. But how much better maybe it was that he left behind other guys who could take his material and spread it out there, plant the seed, so to speak, and we're all getting it now in this internet age, which didn't exist at that time, right? I mean, Neville made these little records and thankfully had all these recordings, and people saved them, and here we are, YouTube, internet, and now this stuff is out there being preserved in the digital library of the internet. So maybe that was also part of Abdullah's genius in like a long-term plan. For a guy who died in like 1956 or 57 and left these guys behind, he deposited his knowledge into these two amazing men, Goddard and Murphy. And they wrote books and did talks and everything. And now all of this stuff is out here, this vast material that's out here for all of us. It's really an amazing thing when you look at it, right? It's miraculous in a way. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll stop now because at this point I'm talking in circles, so I'm just going to end it. Hopefully you lasted this long. I don't know what the average watch time on these videos is. Some people, I wish they'd watch more, they'd listen more, they'd understand more instead of just listening for a few minutes and tuning out. But it's here. It's here if you ever want to fast forward and pick out bits and pieces when you need it. So, and again, go back into my playlists. I have Neville's lectures and all kinds of good stuff for you. So I hope this is, I'm going to try to put some of the pictures and stuff to this, like the photograph of where he lived and stuff like that. So anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.